My in-laws stole my entire business startup fund to pay for my sister-in-law's lavish wedding, then had the nerve to deny it until we caught them red-handed. Now they're facing fraud charges. I'm not usually one to share personal drama online, but honestly, I don't know where else to turn right now. What happened to my family over the past year has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about trust and loyalty. I keep replaying the events in my head, wondering if I handled things right, and I could really use some outside perspective from anyone who's been through something similar. Let me start from the beginning. My wife Violet and I have been together for about 6 years, married for 3. When we first started dating, her parents seemed pretty normal. Her mom Daisy was always very involved in family decisions, maybe a little too involved, but I figured that's just how some families are. Her dad Roman was quieter, more of a follower when it came to family stuff. Violet has an older sister, Adeline, who's always been the golden child in their eyes. The thing about Daisy is that she has this way of making everything about her family's image. She's constantly worried about what the neighbors think, what people at church will say, how things look to extended family. At first, I thought it was harmless. Maybe even admirable that she cared so much about her daughters. But over time, I started noticing how she would manipulate situations to get what she wanted, always under the guise of what's best for the family. Violet and I got married in a pretty simple ceremony. Nothing too fancy, just close family and friends. Daisy made a few comments about how she wished we could have done something bigger, more impressive, but we were just starting out and didn't have much money. I was working in tech support at the time, and Violet was finishing up her nursing degree. We were happy with our modest wedding, even if Daisy wasn't. About a year into our marriage, I started seriously planning to launch my own IT consulting business. I'd been saving up for this dream for years, even before I met Violet. I had about $45,000 set aside in a separate savings account that I'd been building since I was in college. This wasn't just pocket money or wedding funds or anything like that. This was my entire professional future, years of careful saving, overtime pay, side gigs, everything I could scrape together to make my entrepreneurial dreams come true. Violet knew all about my business plans. She was actually really supportive and excited about the idea of me being my own boss. We'd talked about it constantly, planned out timelines, researched business licenses, the whole 9 yards. I was planning to quit my job and launch the consultancy within about 6 months. Around the same time, Adeline announced she was getting engaged to her boyfriend Axel. Now, Axel is a decent enough guy, but he's not exactly what you'd call financially stable. He works in retail management and doesn't make a lot of money. Adeline works part-time as a receptionist. Together, they probably make about as much as I do alone. But Daisy immediately started planning this massive, over-the-top wedding for them. I'm talking about a $40,000 plus wedding. Fancy venue, catered dinner for 200 people, professional photographer, live band, the works. Way more than what Adeline and Axel could afford, and honestly, way more than what Daisy and Roman should have been spending either. Roman works at a hardware store and Daisy is a part-time bookkeeper. They're not wealthy people. But Daisy was absolutely determined that her eldest daughter was going to have the wedding of her dreams. She kept talking about how this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, how Adeline deserved the best, how the whole family would remember this day forever. She even said things like, "What will people think if we can't give our daughter a proper wedding?" It was all about appearances and status. Violet and I tried to be supportive, even though privately we thought the whole thing was excessive. We offered to help with some of the smaller expenses, maybe contribute a few $100s toward the flowers or something. But Daisy kept insisting they had everything covered, that we shouldn't worry about it. Here's where things get complicated. Violet has always been very close to her mother. Maybe too close, in hindsight. They talk on the phone multiple times a week, share everything with each other, ask each other for advice on everything from what to cook for dinner to major life decisions. I always knew Violet told her mom pretty much everything about our lives, but I never really thought much of it. I figured that's just how some mother-daughter relationships work. So when Violet mentioned to her mom that I was planning to start my own business and had been saving up money for it, I didn't think anything of it at the time. Violet was proud of me and excited about our future, so naturally she wanted to share that with her family. She told Daisy about how hard I'd been working to save money, how much I had set aside, even some details about my business plan and timeline. At the time, Daisy seemed really interested and supportive. She asked lots of questions about what kind of business I wanted to start, how much money I thought I'd need, when I was planning to launch. I was actually touched that she seemed so invested in our success. She even offered to help spread the word about my future business to people she knew who might need IT services. Looking back now, I realized she wasn't being supportive at all. She was gathering information. About 3 months before Adeline's wedding, Violet and I started noticing that Daisy was acting a bit strange. She seemed stressed and distracted whenever we saw her. She'd make comments about how expensive everything was getting for the wedding, how there were all these unexpected costs that kept popping up. Roman looked worried too, but he's not much of a talker, so he never said anything directly. Adeline, meanwhile, was completely absorbed in wedding planning and seemed oblivious to any financial stress her parents might be feeling. She kept adding things to the wedding plan: upgraded flowers, better photographers, a more expensive dress. Daisy never told her no to anything. Violet suggested maybe we could help out more with the wedding expenses, but Daisy insisted they didn't need our help. She kept saying everything was under control, that they'd figured it out. I offered to lend them some money if they needed it, but Daisy got almost offended at the suggestion. "We don't need charity," she said. "We can take care of our own daughter's wedding." Then, about 6 weeks before the wedding, Violet made an offhand comment that really stuck with me. We were talking about my business plans over dinner, and she mentioned that her mom had asked her some very specific questions about my savings account. What bank was it with? How much exactly did I have saved? Was it in my name only, or did Violet have access to it too? At the time, Violet didn't think much of it. She figured her mom was just being curious, or maybe wanted to understand our financial situation better. But something about it made me uncomfortable. Why would Daisy need to know those specific details? It seemed like weird questions to ask about someone else's money. I asked Violet what exactly she told her mom, and Violet said she'd been pretty open about everything. She'd mentioned that I had about $45,000 saved up in a business account, that it was at First National Bank, that I was planning to use it all to start my company within the next few months. She'd even mentioned that the account was in my name only, since it was money I'd saved before we got married. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, but I couldn't. Something about the timing of these questions, right when Daisy was stressing about wedding expenses, just didn't sit right with me. But I didn't want to seem paranoid or accusatory, especially about Violet's mom. 2 weeks before Adeline's wedding, I decided to check my savings account balance online, something I hadn't done in a few weeks since I'd been busy with work. What I saw made my blood run cold. The balance was $7,000. I stared at the screen in complete disbelief. There had to be some mistake. I logged out and logged back in, thinking maybe it was a technical error. But the number was the same. $7,000. $38,000 was just gone. My hands were shaking as I called the bank. The customer service representative told me that there had been a large withdrawal 2 weeks earlier for $38,000. When I asked for more details, she said the withdrawal had been made in person at a branch location, by someone who had provided proper identification and account information. But here's the thing, I hadn't made any withdrawal. I hadn't been to the bank in over a month. I had no idea how someone could have accessed my account. I asked the bank to investigate immediately and told them this was unauthorized access. They said they'd look into it, but that it might take several days to get all the details. In the meantime, I was advised to come in person to review the withdrawal paperwork and security footage. I was in complete panic mode. This was my entire future, years of saving, gone. I couldn't understand how this had happened. Had someone stolen my identity? Had there been a banking error? I was terrified and confused and angry all at the same time. I didn't tell Violet right away. I wanted to understand what had happened before I involved her. I spent the rest of the day trying to figure out if there was any way I could have been the victim of some kind of financial crime. The next morning, I went to the bank branch where the withdrawal had been made. The manager was very understanding and pulled up all the documentation. What I saw made me feel sick. The person who had withdrawn my money had provided a driver's license and social security number that matched my account information. But when they showed me the security footage from that day, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was Daisy, clear as day, standing at the teller window, withdrawing my money from my account. I asked the bank manager to replay the footage several times because I couldn't process what I was seeing. There was no doubt about it. This was my mother-in-law, somehow accessing my private business savings account and taking nearly everything I had. But how was this even possible? How did she have my personal information? How did she know my account details? That's when it hit me. Violet. Violet had told her mother everything about my savings account. Where it was, how much was in it, what my personal information was. Daisy had somehow used that information to access my money. I sat in that bank office feeling like the world was spinning. Not only had someone stolen from me, but it was my own family member. And my wife had unknowingly provided the information that made it possible. I asked the bank for copies of all the documentation so I could file a police report. The manager assured me that what Daisy had done was definitely fraud, and that I should contact law enforcement immediately. I drove home in a daze. I knew I had to tell Violet, but I had no idea how to even begin that conversation. How do you tell your wife that her mother stole your life savings? When I got home, Violet could tell immediately that something was wrong. I was pale and shaky and probably looked like I'd seen a ghost. She kept asking what was wrong, if I was sick, if something had happened at work. Finally, I just told her to sit down because I had something serious to discuss. I showed her the bank statements and explained what had happened. I told her about the security footage and what I'd seen. Violet's reaction was not what I expected. Instead of being shocked or angry at her mother, her first response was denial. She kept saying there must be some mistake, that there was no way her mother would do something like that. She suggested that maybe someone who looked like Daisy had somehow gotten my information, or that the bank had made an error. I understood that this was hard for her to process. Daisy was her mother, and Violet had never seen her as capable of something like this. But I needed her to understand the seriousness of the situation. I explained how Daisy could have gotten my account information through the conversations she'd had with Violet about my business plans and savings. I wasn't blaming Violet, but I needed her to understand that her mother had used information that only family members would know. Violet got defensive about this. She said she'd only shared that information because she was proud of me and wanted her family to know about our plans. She said she never imagined her mother would use that information for anything harmful. The conversation became tense. Violet kept insisting that there had to be some other explanation, while I was trying to make her understand that I'd seen the security footage with my own eyes. Her mother had definitely taken my money. Finally, I suggested that we go together to talk to Daisy directly. If there was some innocent explanation, Daisy would be able to clear everything up. If not, we'd know for sure what had happened. Violet reluctantly agreed, though I could tell she was hoping her mother would have some reasonable explanation that would make all of this go away. We drove to Daisy and Roman's house that evening. Adeline was there too, going over some last-minute wedding details with her mom. When we walked in, Daisy greeted us normally, asking how we were doing and if we wanted coffee. I decided to be direct. I told Daisy that there had been an unauthorized withdrawal from my business savings account, and that I'd seen security footage of the person who made the withdrawal. I watched her face carefully as I said this. Daisy's expression didn't change much, but I noticed she went very still. She asked what I was talking about, claiming she had no idea what I meant. I told her that $38,000 had been taken from my account 2 weeks earlier, and that the bank had footage of someone using my personal information to make the withdrawal. Daisy looked confused and said that sounded terrible, that someone must have stolen my identity. She suggested I call the police immediately to report the crime. But then I told her that the person in the security footage looked exactly like her. The room went completely silent. Adeline stopped looking at whatever wedding papers she'd been reviewing. Roman looked up from his newspaper. Violet was watching her mother intently. Daisy's reaction was immediate anger. She said she was insulted that I would accuse her of stealing from me. She said she couldn't believe I would suggest such a thing, especially right before Adeline's wedding. She demanded to know why I would make such a horrible accusation against her. I stayed calm and told her I wasn't making accusations. I was simply stating what I'd seen on the bank's security footage. If she hadn't taken my money, then we could figure out together who had. Daisy continued to deny everything, but I noticed she was getting more agitated. She started talking about how stressed she was about the wedding, how expensive everything had become, how she was worried about disappointing Adeline. Then Adeline spoke up and asked what was going on. She'd been listening to our conversation and was clearly confused about why we were talking about stolen money right before her wedding. Violet explained the situation to Adeline, who looked shocked. Adeline immediately said there was no way her mother would steal from anyone, especially family. She suggested that maybe someone had used fake ID or that the bank had made an error. But Roman, who had been quiet this whole time, had a strange expression on his face. He kept looking at Daisy with what I can only describe as concern or maybe even suspicion. I decided to push a little harder. I told Daisy that the bank had all the documentation from the withdrawal, including copies of the ID that was used. I said if she was innocent, She wouldn't mind going to the bank with me to look at the evidence and help figure out who had impersonated her. Daisy became even more defensive. She said she didn't have time for this kind of drama right before her daughter's wedding. She accused me of trying to ruin Adeline's big day with false accusations. That's when Violet finally spoke up. She told her mother that if she was innocent, the best thing to do would be to cooperate with the investigation so we could find out who really took the money. Daisy looked at Violet with an expression I'd never seen before, almost betrayed, like she couldn't believe her own daughter wasn't automatically taking her side. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes or so, with Daisy continuing to deny everything but getting increasingly agitated. Finally, I told her that I was going to file a police report the next day, and that the authorities would investigate whether someone had used her identity or whether she had actually taken the money herself. Daisy's response to this was to accuse me of being vindictive and trying to destroy her family. She said I was probably lying about the whole thing to get attention or cause drama. She even suggested that maybe I had spent the money myself and was trying to blame her to cover it up. This was so outrageous that even Violet looked stunned. The idea that I would steal from myself and then lie about it was completely absurd. At that point, I realized we weren't going to get anywhere with this conversation. Daisy was either genuinely innocent and extremely defensive, or she was guilty and committed to denying everything. Either way, the only path forward was to let the authorities investigate. We left their house with nothing resolved. Violet was quiet on the drive home, clearly struggling with the situation. I could tell she was torn between loyalty to her mother and the evidence that something very wrong had happened. That night, Violet and I had a long, difficult conversation. I tried to help her understand that I wasn't attacking her family, I was just trying to recover money that had been stolen from me. I explained that this wasn't just about the money, this was about my entire future, my business plans, everything I'd worked for. Violet said she understood how upset I must be, but she still couldn't believe her mother would do something like this. She kept hoping there would turn out to be some other explanation. I filed a police report the next morning. The officer I spoke with said that bank fraud cases like this were usually pretty straightforward to investigate, especially when there was security footage and documentation. He said they'd look into it and get back to me within a few days. In the meantime, Adeline's wedding was still happening that weekend. Daisy had asked Violet if we were still planning to attend, and Violet wasn't sure what to say. On one hand, she didn't want to miss her sister's wedding. On the other hand, the situation with her mother was extremely uncomfortable. I told Violet that the decision was up to her. I would support whatever she wanted to do. If she wanted to go to the wedding, I'd go with her. If she didn't feel comfortable going, I'd understand that too. Violet ultimately decided we should go to the wedding. She said Adeline shouldn't be punished for whatever was happening with Daisy, and that family events were important regardless of other conflicts. The wedding was awkward, to say the least. Daisy barely spoke to us, and when she did, it was with cold politeness. She made sure we were seated at a table toward the back of the reception, away from most of the family. Adeline was so busy with wedding activities that we barely saw her. But the wedding was beautiful and expensive. Very expensive. I couldn't help but notice all the details that Daisy had insisted on: the elaborate floral arrangements, the premium bar service, the live band, the professional photographer and videographer. Everything was top of the line. I found myself wondering how Daisy and Roman had managed to pay for all of this. They'd been stressed about money just a few weeks earlier, but somehow they'd pulled together enough to pay for this extravagant celebration. The thought that my stolen money might have paid for Adeline's wedding made me feel sick. But I tried to focus on the fact that Adeline was happy and that this was supposed to be her special day. A few days after the wedding, I got a call from the police detective who had been assigned to my case. He said they'd completed their investigation and had some answers for me. The detective explained that Daisy had used my personal information to access my bank account. She'd gone to a different branch location than where I normally banked, presented identification with my name and social security number, and convinced the teller that she was authorized to make withdrawals from the account. The detective said this was a clear case of identity theft and bank fraud. He said they had all the evidence they needed to file criminal charges against Daisy. He also told me something that made my stomach drop. When they'd investigated Daisy's recent financial activity, they found that she had deposited $38,000 into her checking account the same day she'd withdrawn it from mine. And over the following 2 weeks, she'd written checks totaling nearly that exact amount to various wedding vendors: the caterer, the venue, the photographer, the florist. My money had definitely been used to pay for Adeline's wedding. The detective asked if I wanted to press charges. He explained that identity theft and bank fraud were serious felonies, and that Daisy could face significant jail time if convicted. I told him I needed some time to think about it and discuss it with my wife. When I told Violet what the detective had found, she was devastated. There was no longer any doubt about what had happened. Her mother had stolen from me and used the money to pay for Adeline's wedding. Violet cried when I told her. She kept saying she was sorry, that she never imagined her mother would do something like this. She felt guilty for sharing information about my savings account, even though she'd had no way of knowing her mother would use that information to commit a crime. I assured Violet that none of this was her fault. Her mother was the one who had chosen to steal from me. Violet had just been sharing news about our lives with her family, which was completely normal. But now we had to decide what to do next. The detective needed to know if I wanted to press charges against Daisy. This was an incredibly difficult decision. On one hand, Daisy had committed a serious crime against me. She'd stolen my life savings and used it for her own purposes. She'd lied about it and denied everything when confronted. If I didn't press charges, she might think she could get away with this kind of behavior. On the other hand, Daisy was Violet's mother and Adeline's mother. Pressing charges would mean that Daisy could go to jail, which would devastate the whole family. Adeline would find out that her beautiful wedding had been paid for with stolen money. Roman would have to deal with having his wife arrested. Violet and I talked about it for days. Violet said she would support whatever decision I made, but I could tell she was hoping I would find some way to handle this without involving criminal charges. I suggested that maybe we could give Daisy a chance to make this right before involving the legal system. If she admitted what she'd done, returned the money, and apologized, maybe we could handle this as a family matter instead of a criminal one. Violet liked this idea. She suggested that we meet with Daisy again and give her one more opportunity to tell the truth and work out some way to repay me. We called Daisy and asked if we could meet with her and Roman to discuss something important. Daisy agreed, though she sounded wary on the phone. When we met at their house, I told Daisy that the police investigation had been completed. I explained that they had evidence proving she had taken money from my account and used it to pay for Adeline's wedding expenses. Daisy's initial response was to continue denying everything. She claimed the police must have made a mistake, that she'd never taken anyone's money. But Roman looked terrible. I could tell he knew what had happened. He kept staring at Daisy with this expression of disappointment and shame. I told Daisy that I had a decision to make about whether to press criminal charges. I explained that bank fraud and identity theft were serious crimes, but that I was willing to consider handling this privately if she would admit what she'd done and agree to repay the money. Daisy continued to deny everything for another few minutes. But then Roman spoke up. "Daisy," he said quietly, "just tell them the truth." Daisy looked at Roman with surprise and anger. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. But Roman shook his head. "I know what you did," he said. "I saw the bank statements. I know where that money came from." The room went very quiet. It was clear that Roman had known about Daisy's theft and had been keeping quiet about it. Daisy stared at her husband for a long moment. Then she looked at Violet and me. Finally, her facade cracked. "I didn't have a choice," she said, and started crying. Adeline's wedding was already planned. We'd already put deposits down on everything. I didn't know how else to pay for it. Violet looked stunned. Even though we'd known the truth, hearing her mother actually admit to stealing from me was still a shock. Daisy continued trying to justify what she'd done. She said she'd planned to pay me back after the wedding. She said she'd been hoping to get a loan or find some other way to replace the money before I noticed it was missing. I asked her how she'd planned to repay $38,000 when she and Roman didn't have that kind of money in the first place. Daisy didn't have a good answer for that. She just kept saying she'd thought she would figure something out. I told Daisy that her intentions didn't matter at this point. She'd stolen from me and lied about it. She'd used my money to pay for her daughter's wedding without my permission. Daisy begged me not to press charges. She said going to jail would ruin her life and destroy the family. She promised she would find a way to pay me back, even if it took years. I told her that I'd consider not pressing charges if she could come up with a realistic plan to repay the money quickly. I explained that this money wasn't just savings, it was my entire business fund, and every day that went by without it was costing me opportunities. Daisy and Roman said they would try to get a loan or maybe sell some assets to repay me. They asked for a few weeks to see what they could arrange. I agreed to give them 3 weeks to come up with a plan. If they could show me a concrete way to repay the money within a reasonable time frame, I would consider not filing criminal charges. Violet was relieved that we were trying to work things out without involving the legal system. But I could tell she was also deeply hurt by her mother's betrayal. The relationship between Violet and Daisy had been fundamentally changed by this situation. Over the next 3 weeks, Daisy and Roman looked into various options for repaying me. They applied for loans, considered selling their car or taking out a second mortgage on their house. But their credit wasn't great, and they didn't have enough equity in their home to borrow $38,000. At the end of 3 weeks, they came back to us with an offer to repay the money in monthly installments of $500 over several years. By their calculation, it would take them about 6.5 years to fully repay what Daisy had stolen. This wasn't acceptable to me. 6.5 years was far too long, and $500 a month wasn't going to help me start my business anytime soon. I'd already had to postpone my business launch indefinitely because I no longer had startup capital. I told Daisy and Roman that their repayment plan wasn't adequate. I needed the money back much sooner than that if I was going to be able to move forward with my business plans. Daisy became angry when I rejected their offer. She said they were doing the best they could and that I was being unreasonable. She accused me of being greedy and caring more about money than family. This really bothered me. I wasn't being greedy. I was asking for my own money back after it had been stolen from me. The fact that Daisy had used it for her daughter's wedding didn't change the fact that it was theft. At that point, I realized that Daisy still didn't really understand the seriousness of what she'd done. She seemed to think that because she was family, and because she'd used the money for something she considered important, that somehow made it acceptable. I told Daisy and Roman that I was going to move forward with pressing criminal charges. I explained that I'd given them a chance to make this right, but that their solution wasn't adequate. Daisy became hysterical when I said this. She begged me to reconsider, saying that criminal charges would ruin her life and hurt the whole family. But I'd made my decision. Daisy had stolen from me, lied about it, and then offered an inadequate solution when confronted with the evidence. I wasn't going to let her get away with it just because she was family. Violet was disappointed that we couldn't work things out privately, but she understood my decision. She said she supported me and that her mother had brought this on herself. I called the detective the next day and told him I wanted to press charges. He said they would arrest Daisy within the next few days. Daisy was arrested at her home 2 days later. She was charged with identity theft, bank fraud, and several other related crimes. The local newspaper even ran a small story about it, which was embarrassing for the whole family. Adeline was devastated when she found out what had happened. She'd had no idea that her wedding had been paid for with stolen money. She felt guilty and ashamed, even though none of it was her fault. Adeline actually offered to try to help repay me, but she and Axel don't make enough money to be able to contribute significantly. I told her I appreciated the offer but that this wasn't her responsibility. Roman was also deeply ashamed of what Daisy had done. He apologized to me several times and said he should have tried to stop her when he realized what was happening. Daisy hired a lawyer and initially planned to fight the charges. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. Bank records, security footage, witness testimony. Her lawyer eventually advised her to accept a plea deal. Daisy ultimately pleaded guilty to the charges against her. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, though she may only serve about 18 months with good behavior. She was also ordered to pay restitution, which means she'll have to repay me the full amount eventually. The whole legal process took about 8 months from start to finish. During that time, the relationships within Violet's family were completely destroyed. Adeline barely speaks to her mother anymore. Roman filed for divorce while Daisy was awaiting sentencing. Violet has maintained very limited contact with her mother. As for my business plans, I eventually managed to get a small business loan to replace some of the startup capital Daisy had stolen. I launched my IT consulting company about a year later than originally planned, but it's been successful so far. The experience taught me a lot about trust, family dynamics, and the importance of keeping financial information private. It also showed me how strong my marriage to Violet really is. We got through this difficult situation together, and our relationship is probably stronger now because of it. Daisy was released from prison about 6 months ago and is slowly starting to repay the restitution. At the current rate, it will take her many years to fully repay what she stole, but at least there's a legal framework requiring her to do so. Violet and I have talked about whether we might ever be able to forgive Daisy and rebuild some kind of relationship with her. Violet misses having a close relationship with her mother, but she says she can't trust Daisy anymore after what happened. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive Daisy completely. What she did wasn't just theft, It was a betrayal of family trust that affected multiple people's lives. Adeline's marriage started under a cloud because of how her wedding was funded. Roman's marriage ended. Violet's relationship with her mother was destroyed. My business plans were delayed by over a year. But I'm glad I pressed charges instead of trying to handle it privately. Daisy needed to face real consequences for what she did, and the legal system ensured that she would eventually repay what she stole. The whole experience was exhausting and emotionally draining, but I think we made the right decisions throughout. Sometimes family members do terrible things, and when that happens, you have to be willing to hold them accountable even if it's painful. I hope sharing this story helps other people who might be dealing with similar situations. Family theft is more common than people realize, and it's important to take it seriously even when it involves people you love.